Welcome to the Invernadero Mind Podcast. I am your host, Gabriela, and I'm so happy that you're here. Invernadero is Spanish for greenhouse. It represents light, life, and a home for bright minds. In this podcast, I discuss hot present topics in today's culture, and our guests share their successes, challenges, and their journey in finding balance between chasing their dreams while protecting their mind and spirit in this fast-paced culture. In this inclusive podcast, we talk to everyone. Stay tuned and let's get the conversation started. Welcome to another week, first week of May, and I'm so excited for all the interviews I have lined up for this month. For this week's episode, I'm joined by the super talented Shreya Malik, who is a software engineer located in South California. She studied bioinformatics in college, but also took coursework in biology, physics, business, and computer science. We discuss her journey, struggles, and challenges young women may face in general in the tech world. She mentions that being a multi-minority in the tech industry can be challenging and gives the perfect example, her. She is Indian American, female, and young. And as she says, to too many people, these three things can define her, and she is on a mission to prove them wrong. I love her content, especially her much inspirational movement called #ReactResiliently. She says, and I quote, "My goal is to help aspiring women in tech and other groups, of course, to feel empowered, to make their voices heard, and equip them with strategies to resiliently handle difficult situations." I think that resilience is one of the skills that we as women have learned to master due to all the circumstances we have been exposed to historically, and I think it's super important to teach this skill to other generations. Let's welcome Shreya Malik. Hello, Shreya. How are you? Thank you so much for doing this interview.
Of course. Nice to meet you finally, Gabby.
Yes.
How are you today?
Let's start from the beginning. What is your specific field? What did you go to school for?
So those two answers are a little bit different for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to school for bioinformatics. It was at UC San Diego through their bioengineering department. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I thought when I graduated, I'm going to go work in a lab, maybe do a master's, basically kind of do wet lab research type of things. But my major involved a lot of coursework in computer science, and a lot of my background from high school and prior years also incorporated into that. And I ended up pursuing a career in computer science and software engineering afterwards. So that is what I do now.
Oh, cool. So did you always know, like when you were in high school, did you have an idea, or you were kind of, trying to figure out things and kind of, left the decision making for after graduation?
A lot of my schooling experience kind of pushed me towards STEM in general. Mm-hmm. So I knew I'd end up in a STEM-oriented field. I just didn't know which one. So at the time in high school, I was good at biology, and at least I found math interesting. So when I combined the two, I found that UC San Diego, my top dream school, offered a bioinformatics program, and that was it. I just applied to that and called it everything I wanted. And when I got in, thankfully, that's when I started thinking about the nuances within the field and the different opportunities within that major and outside of the major as well.
Yeah. So, getting admitted to your university, did you have faced any challenges? Was it a smooth transition, or did you have to take any exams for the specific degree that you chose?
No exams for the specific degree. It was just the standard SAT scores, transcripts, letters of recommendation, the usual for most US-based schools. I remember all the UCs used the same application, so it was really just a matter of ticking all the boxes for applying to each school, and we went from there.
Cool. And now you code, which to me sounds a little intimidating, to be honest, because I've never, I know a little bit of HTML, but that's it. Like I have no specific, I have no knowledge on it. But for you, what was the most challenging thing while learning how to code?
So my first exposure to an official programming class was actually in middle school. I went to a school where they had a required class on coding in the 7th and 8th grade. And they actually had it for 6th grade as well. I only transferred into that school during 7th grade. So it was a challenge right there because all of my classmates had been doing this coding since 6th grade. And I was a 7th grader trying to learn all the material. Which doesn't sound like you teach a 7th grader that much, but it surprisingly was. So that curriculum was coding in Pascal, which, if you're familiar with just the tech stacks we use nowadays, it's a very antiquated language.
Yeah.
So that choice of language made it a little bit more difficult to kind of get started. I remember struggling with the material quite a bit, actually. And to this day, I have no idea how I did this at the age of 12, but all the classroom assignments that we're supposed to complete in the classroom, I actually took them to my home computer. And I don't know how I did this, but I set up Pascal on my computer at home, on my parents' computer, and I would do those classroom assignments that was supposed to happen just in the classroom for hours into the nights. And part of me is impressed that I was able to set it up, and part of me is like, oh my gosh, it took me almost twice the amount of time that was given to get these assignments done. But I think that really drove the start of my interest. And since I had that exposure earlier on, it was something that I kind of latched onto going into college when computer science was already part of my curriculum.
Mm-hmm. How do you, because, for example, in my case, my mom was very proud when I pursued finance school. How about you? What do your parents think of that kind of, career you chose?
I'm going to be honest, I think they secretly pushed me towards it a little bit. My dad's in the technology industry and my mom's in the education industry. And both of them have jobs in STEM. And they kind of secretly, I don't know if they'll ever admit it, but I think they pushed me towards it to start with. They were really excited that I did respond to their pushing, I'm sure. And it's been great since then.
Awesome. So you mentioned this language, Pascal, which, you started with. For somebody who's just getting started or, interested in starting to learn how to code, what kind of language do you recommend is the most, I guess, adequate for somebody who doesn't have that much experience?
So not Pascal, that's for sure. Let's see. So I think the easiest language to kind of get started with would be Python. That is a language where it's relatively lightweight, relatively easy to learn. Some of the functionalities are similar to the English language, so it kind of makes logical sense. If someone already knows that they plan on going into the coding world to develop websites, for example, maybe JavaScript is a better starting point. But those are the two languages I think I'd go with to start out with nowadays.
When it comes to your work, do you face any major roadblocks or creativity?
Sometimes when, you think, especially if you're bilingual, for example, I grew up speaking Hindi at home and English at school. And my brain language, when I have thoughts, are in English, right? But when I'm coding on the computer, my thoughts will occur in Java. And I can write code in JavaScript and Python, but my thoughts occur in Java. And I think that's a very interesting phenomenon. But in terms of staying creative, when I'm coding at my job, for the most part, you know what you're going to create because you want to have a piece of functionality working, right? So there's not a ton of creativity there in terms of what should I code. It's more like, how should I code it? And if you don't know how to, there's always Google and websites that will help provide ideas with that. And when I'm coding for side projects, usually I start the coding once I know what the side project should be. So for example, if I'm just thinking about ideas or something that I can use on the side, that's when I'll start it. So at that point, I'll flesh out the expected features. I'll figure out what exactly needs to be done and break it down into chunks before I start coding. So at that point, it becomes kind of like work where you kind of already know the what. It's more about figuring out how.
The how. It's so interesting. And, I totally understand what you said about speaking a second language. I don't know if it happens to you, like, because I was born and raised in Peru, so I speak Spanish, it's my native language. And to me, sometimes when I say something, like I'll be at home and I'll say something to my sister, sometimes I'm like what kind of language did I just use? Did I just speak it in Spanish or in English? I have to ask myself because like I'm so used to using, both. So like in your case, when you're thinking in English or talking to your family in Hindi, like and you're writing code, it's like your brain has to go like all over. So to me, that's super, super interesting. Like to think like there's people out there that speak more than just like regular idioms. There's other kinds of languages that it's just based on digits. And that's to me super cool and kind of intimidating at the same time.
No, not at all. I mean, you said you speak HTML a little bit. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but when you go to any website, if you right click and click on insert element, you can see the HTML code of pretty much
Yeah.
any website. So if you ever wanted to do that, your brain can also think in HTML. So you're just like,
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Now, switching a little bit to your journey, I read something in your bio, actually in your website, yeah, that caught my attention, and I want to read it to you. It's just a couple sentences, and I want to hear your intake on this. You wrote, "I found it's not easy being a multi-minority in the tech industry. I am an Indian American, I'm female, and I am young. Too many people, these three things define me, and I am on a mission to prove them wrong." First of all, this is super powerful. When I read it, being a minority myself, I was like, this is super, super cool for somebody your age. You're like sharing all this content, share your experiences, and you're on a journey to inspire other women. Can you give us like examples of times where you have experienced maybe microaggressions, either during college or in your work?
yeah, of course. In college, I'm going to be honest, I don't think I paid attention to it as much. In college, I was kind of just on a mission to experience everything. So if anything didn't serve me, I just dropped it immediately.
Yeah.
However, once you get to the working world, you can't just drop things immediately.
Yeah.
So that's when, upon entering the team that I worked on for years, actually, it was a 20 plus person team. And for multiple years of that time, I was the only female on it, one out of over 20. And I was also the youngest person on that team by more than 10 or 15 years. There were other Indian American people on that team. So there was some degree of diversity, but there wasn't a large amount of diversity, I'd say, based on the other two factors that I just mentioned. So what ended up happening was that I found that I didn't have very much trustworthiness kind of coming in. A lot of people thought that they were right, that their view or their way of doing things was right as a default. A lot of times I would come up to people, suggest things based on my research, and just because those things were kind of went against their initial intuition, I found that I had to present my thoughts with more findings, more research, more just a lot more work for them to listen to me. And that in itself is a microaggression. There's some mansplaining, which we can talk about in the future or now to you. But basically the lesson that I learned or what ended up happening was that once I had developed a certain level of trustworthiness, a lot of the microaggressions did start to subside. Not all of them, of course, but it really it really played into having to work a little bit harder than I think if I wasn't part of those multi-minority groups.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that because I heard many women in this field express those things, right? Somebody said, I hate the fact that I have to prove myself more than other people have to do, that my male peers. And to me, that's super frustrating because I can, in a way, relate to this. When I was going to school, I went to school for finance. And in my class, I kid you not, out of 50 kids, there were like only 10 girls and one of them being me. So it was super intimidating. And when I had to like present my projects or work in a group, Like, of course, right? The easiest tasks were given to me, or like no, like zero, F's given to, in regards to asking for my opinion, for instance. So
Right.
that has to be super frustrating. How do you deal with those things? Like when you see this type of microaggressions happening, like how do you deal? Like what's your first reaction?
My first reaction is unsurprisingly anger, but what I've learned is that it's there's a lot more power in suppressing that initial reaction, waiting for 24 to 48 hours, and then having some sort of action out of it. Because a lot of times when the reaction comes straight out of anger or frustration or jealousy or any sort of negative emotion, you end up doing more damage than good. Because at the end of the day, I think this is a whole different but related thought is I think when we talk about women in STEM, we start to view men as the enemy, but they're not the enemy at all. They're just the other 50% of the population. They're not the enemy. They didn't ask to be the majority, right? We need to view them as allies. We need to identify the ones that are willing to work for us as allies. For example, one of my managers was definitely an ally. He did everything he could to present me with opportunities that he thought I'd be interested in. And the ones that did not serve us as allies, those were the people that I would invest less emotional energy into. I would just work with them to the extent that I needed to, try my best to educate them. But if they didn't respond, I would really just do the bare minimum with them and focus my energy into making change where I could.
Now, other than gender, were you ever in a position where you experienced other type of microaggressions related to your race, for example, or your age?
Not so much for race, but for age, yes. For example, there was a time when a senior member of the team was about to quit, and I was the only other person in the team that had the exact same tech stack as him. So the plan was for me to replace that senior member of the team. And this senior member of the team was probably in his 60s, so he's very senior. And someone made a joke in front of everybody that, oh, you're only 2 years out of college, you're going to replace him. And guess what? I did. And obviously, like along the way, I had to ask for help, but I'm resourceful enough to figure that out. And at the end of the day, within like 3 months, I was doing all of the tasks that he was doing. But the fact that that comment was made in front of the entire team of 20 plus people again, is just a microaggression that was supposed to be a joke, but it was not funny.
Yeah, that's the thing about people, like when they make jokes like that, in their head, it's just funny, right? Like I heard somebody once tell me that at work, like it's supposed to be funny, but it's not, right? Because you don't understand the kind of message that you're sending, and I think it's deeper than just the intention of your joke. So that's super frustrating. Now let's talk a little bit about failure. While learning your craft, I assume you have experienced lots of failure, whether it be testing different approaches or simply not knowing all the answers to something. How do you deal with failure? Like, can you give us an example of a time where you failed big time, and like what did you do to solve it?
Oh gosh, yes. Failure is something I think we should honestly celebrate and talk about more because quite frankly, I don't know anyone who's successful that has never failed before. No one can say that. Yeah. That being said, one of my, earlier failures was my first year out of school, was a bit of a transition period between school and working full time. And I basically went from a senior as a bioinformatics undergraduate student to a software engineering entry-level position. And the expectation was for me to code in an engine that was entirely built in C++, just language I barely work with. There's no documentation, and the code was very spaghetti-like. So, of course, I had some trouble with this. And being a bioinformatics major and not a computer science major, it seemed that the other people on the team, there was one other new grad at the time, was able to kind of grasp those concepts and still provide more help to the team than I was able to in my capacity. So that first year was a bit rough, just getting used to learning a new code base, getting used to working with team members in a certain way throughout the entire software development lifecycle. figuring out how to utilize your resources. And what ended up happening was my very first team review, or wasn't a team review, it was a performance review. It's actually not that great. It was kind of like it might be time to kick things up a little bit. But around the same time, I also went to the Grace Hopper conference, and that is a celebration for women in tech. And that's where I saw a lot of females in positions, in all sorts of positions, but I really saw some of them openly admitting to failure, openly admitting to, if you're failing at one thing and you just want to accept it, it's okay to try something else. Mm-hmm. So when I came back, I actually got switched to a project, or a different part of that same project, that was code written in Java. And this code was well documented. The mentors in this particular section had a little bit more time to kind of provide some initial help. And the combination of those two things, just a language that I was more familiar with and some documentation and easier available help, changed the game for me. So right there, I was able to kind of grasp onto concepts quicker. Within a couple months, I was contributing much more than ever before. And a few months later, I was given ownership of different components that were all in the Java space at that point. So that was really exciting that things did turn around. But that first year was definitely rough.
Now, were people open to teach you? Like even now at work, when you ask for help, are people open to teach you, or are they like reluctant to kind of, provide information and resources to you?
I'd say everyone is available and everyone wants to help, but not everyone is available. So there are just people that unfortunately are already at 150% capacity. And I can't really fault them for not having time to provide extensive help. They'll obviously be happy to point me to resources, but it's not so much that they have time to help. And there are people that are at 75% capacity that are more than happy to put in the time to help.
Yeah. Do you work with other women, like right now, where you are right now? Are there other women in your team, or are you still pretty much, alone in your department?
So at this particular moment in time, I am in between jobs. I just quit my previous one a couple of weeks back, and I'll be starting the next one in 2 more weeks. So right now, I'm not working with anyone other than myself. But prior to this, like I mentioned before, I was on that team for multiple years where there was not a single other female. I did switch to a full staff team earlier this summer, and there were other females on the team, but none of them were female software developers. So we had product owners, we had QA testers that were female, but not developers. So that is another common trend, is that when you do have females on the team, there is just generally a lower percentage of them that are developers.
I noticed that you post series of content under a category you call hashtag React Resiliently. How did you come up with this term, and what's the idea behind this?
Yay! So I'm glad you noticed that, and clearly you do your research, so thank you. That is the little hashtag that I've created to talk about situations that happen at work or just in life that we face, that often when they happen, it's kind of hard to react in the best possible way. And like I was saying earlier, if you react kind of with an initial negative emotion, the outcome is not always great. But if you react using some sort of framework, pause to think, the idea is to give people a tool or a set of thoughts or a framework or some way to think about the problem kind of differently they may be having. And the other goal really is to foster discussions for people who have used the frameworks that I'm kind of talking about. And I think it's created a lot of positive discussion and helped a lot of people, as I've been told. And it makes me really, really, really happy to hear that you've looked it up and that you've seen it and that people are noticing it.
Yeah, definitely. It's very inspiring. And the resources that you share in general are very inspirational in the sense that, for example, I wish I had, I was following all these accounts, when I was in college, of course, in my field. And it's unfortunate that for me, when I was still a student, there weren't that many resources, right? But one thing that I found very, very inspirational, and that's what made me want to talk to a lot of women in STEM, is that it's like everybody's uniting and posting all this content so that not only women get inspired and perhaps pursue a career in STEM, but also in general share the challenges, the misconceptions, and also the problems, the ups and downs, so that they don't feel that they're alone. Because definitely it's you're outnumbered, but I feel like here in 5 years is gonna grow even bigger, and then there are gonna be more women that are scientists, and I don't know, so many fields, so many careers to go into, really. Now,
Yeah.
do you ever experience imposter syndrome?
All the time.
What do you do?
Okay, so when it comes to imposter syndrome, my thought on this is that, especially early on, it was a very crippling feeling where I was like, I'm not cut out for this, especially that first year that I was telling you that was pretty rough. My thought was, I'm a bioinformatics major. I just have, we didn't go in depth into any specific topic in school. So what if I just can't do anything? And that kind of sucked. It would suck for anyone. But what I realized is that imposter syndrome pretty much is going to come up for me and for a lot of my peers. As long as I keep doing things that are not new to me, as long as I keep myself in not my comfort zone, in a zone of growth, imposter syndrome is going to come back. So at this point, it's probably better to learn how to manage it and recognize it than focus on it. So more recently, when I switched to that postdoc team this past July, I basically had to learn an entire set of programming languages that I'd never worked with before, kind of similar to 3 years back. And this time, instead of kind of worrying about the crippling feeling of I can't do this, it was more, okay, here are the things I don't know. Here are the things I do know. These are the number of hours I have in a day, and we're going to get this done. And whatever I don't know, I will just be transparent with my team for things I'm learning, the pace at which I'm learning. And it turned out everything was fine. No one had any issues with the pace I was learning at. I was able to be a fully contributing, functioning member of the team within a couple of months. Yeah. And I think tracking my progress, tracking my accomplishments, and really adding to this repertoire of things in my life that have gone well and things in my life that I have conquered, just reading that list over again whenever that feeling comes back kind of pushes me forward and reminds me that, once again, like, this too shall pass, and this current obstacle is going to one day be in my list of obstacles that I have overcome. Just need to get through the next few days and it'll be there. So that really helps.
I love that. Now, it feels like nowadays people are teaching themselves how to do things, especially in the business field, for example. Do you see the same thing happening in the tech world?
Oh, yes, definitely. Increasingly, companies are getting rid of the requirement to have a college degree. There are a lot of coding boot camps for, instead of the $100,000 it costs to get an undergraduate degree, for $10,000 or $20,000, you're able to do a 3 to 6 month program and get a job in software engineering right off the bat. And it's great. It's a great move. And there are even just Udemy courses that cost US dollars, $11.99. Yeah. And that'll teach you everything you need to be a developer to start with. Just based off those Udemy courses, you could take the tutorial courses, create relevant side projects, develop a portfolio that way, and you can work your way to a job on $12, which is crazy to think about. There are obviously pros and cons to every route, but it's definitely a trend that I am seeing.
Now, as far as companies go, like, for example, if you're going on to like marketing, they don't have that many requirements because obviously you kind of learn as you go. For finance, they ask you all these requirements, including obviously a degree. Now, do you think that companies will eventually start just hiring based on skills rather than degrees, or is this something that is still going to stay? It's going to be a challenge for those people who are, trying to find alternatives to going to college?
I do think that the shift is already starting to come. I'm definitely with more and more companies remove the degree requirement. Mm-hmm. However, most still do have that requirement, although many do not. And I think the shift is going towards removing the requirement. In terms of the skills you need, we have plenty of ways to test those, and that has become the focus of most interviews. Even if there's a requirement to have a degree, they don't necessarily quiz me, do you have a degree? They quiz me on my coding skills.
I notice also, if you go on LinkedIn and you see all these job postings, they are focusing more on the skills rather than what you have, what kind of degree you have, what kind of diploma. So in your field, what kind of skills do you think we need to cultivate in order to have the job you have, or, the job that you kind of are striving for?
Sure. So there's hard skills and soft skills, technical skills and soft skills, two categories basically. And in terms of hard/technical skills, I'd say the problem solving is really one of them. Basic system design concepts will come up a lot in interviews, and you can watch tons of YouTube videos for free to learn that if you wanted to. In terms of coding languages, it doesn't really matter which language you're good at, as long as you're proficient/advanced in at least one and can interview and answer interview coding questions using that language. Traditionally, they prefer languages like JavaScript, Java, C++, or Python. But if you choose another one, I'm sure it'll be accepted. You can check with the company if you need to for that. Yeah. In terms of soft skills, I think we need to cultivate empathy. We need to cultivate leadership. Communication is a big one. I think a lot of software engineers miss the communication skill. It's not something that's really taught in school, but it's really important when it comes to making sure people are on the same page, when it comes to writing documentation, when it comes to understanding requirements. I think that really comes into play.
What are the most common questions you get from your followers? Like, on Instagram, I assume, people write to you saying, hey, what can I do for this? What can I do in this, situation? Like, what are the most common questions people have?
So the most common question I'd say is, how can I get started in software engineering? That would be a very common one. How can I get started coding? And then a lot of people will say, I've done X, Y, Z. What's the best option to go from here? A lot of them also ask very specific questions to their schooling systems, which I generally can't answer because they are in different countries that obviously I'm not aware of the specifics of the systems on those. And then I'd say there's a decent amount of questions on situations such as, how you manage having time for like side projects at the same time as work and social life. Those questions come up, I think, the most often.
It seems like you have a good following, people that really are inspired by the content that you share. But, unfortunately, with every social media platform, you also get, you're exposed to criticism. Do you ever receive like negative messages, like people criticizing your work or the kind of content you're sharing or your ideas? Because obviously you have the right, you're entitled to share your own thoughts on specific topics. But do you ever get this negative or hate comments or messages?
I do. And I didn't realize that I'd get them as soon as I did. A lot of people just like you said, I'm entitled to share my opinions. Other people are entitled to share their opinions. Yeah. And obviously I'm always open to criticism, but sometimes people just are having a bad day and like to message negative things or comment negative things. And for the most part, I try to just ignore it and just realize that person doesn't know any better than to be commenting negativity. And especially in the digital age, in the digital world, everything you do is permanent, right? So if someone's sending a negative comment, or if someone's cursing, saying, "Oh, you don't know how to code, you're a girl," or you only have the same smile in every picture, or, "Oh, this is I'm tired of the same," like if people are saying like something so blatantly negative, that stays on the internet forever. Well, good luck to your future employers. If they see that, that's not going to look great for them either. And I just tell myself that if it's not future employers, somehow karma will catch up to them and take care of them. And that's not my job in this world.
Yeah. Do you feel like any of those messages kind of objectify you as a woman, or are they more focused on the kind of, content you're sharing regarding your job, or is it more personal?
Yeah, a lot of them, for example, I will post a picture of me holding a laptop quite often with a caption, maybe like 5 steps to the most recent one was 5 steps to successfully quitting your job, or 5 steps to handling the situation, or whatever it may be. And a lot of people will comment saying something about appearances, something about, oh, like great smell, or oh, like body comments. And it's like, well, that's obviously not what this was.
It's not even, yeah, like they're even reading the description, or are they just sharing, like, or writing, to criticize your image, which is so frustrating, right? It's like sometimes you put so much effort into doing something, into writing quality content, that you're actually, hope that people will learn from and educate themselves, and it's like all of a sudden you see one hate comment that has nothing to do with what you just shared. So that sucks.
That's like I said, I just tell myself that karma will get to them, and I don't engage in that. Like usually, I like the comments and people are like that are providing insights, and the people who are not, I just don't respond to them. At this point. I think almost every picture at this point, someone will make some sort of like creepy advance, and we just don't. On at least on my content, we don't respond to that.
Yeah.
There's no need to. And then there's people that will comment, how dare you not respond to my DM? It's been 4 days or something. And it's like,
no way.
You're hostile. Saying,
oh my goodness.
How like, do you even check your DMs, or do you even consider yourself a content creator? You haven't responded to me. And like, you messaged me like 1 day ago with nothing with substance. So why would
it's not like you owed to anybody like any response, so which is so crazy. Like that's one negative thing that you definitely have to deal with and know how to not let it get to your head. Of course, when you speak about resilience, some people you are just better than others, because honestly, like I consider myself more like in the middle. Normally I don't really let things get to me, but like sometimes people can be so cruel. I haven't gotten any hate messages yet, but like eventually if I do, I'm sure I'll have to like learn how to filter those things, because it can definitely get to a person, and thanks to that, I mean, we can receive that people, can fall into depression and all these things. Something that is supposed to be fun and educational can turn into something negative for the creator. So that, I mean, that's the negative, I guess, that you have to know how to really deal with it. Now, what do you do for fun other than, working and, creating content? What do you do to kind of find, peace and quiet and decompress from your, daily stresses?
Sure. Let's see. I am a Yelp elite reviewer, so spend a lot of time just exploring restaurants in my neighborhood. I like just random outdoor kind of events and activities. A lot of my answers to this question are from a pre-COVID world. So, if there's like some sort of event in the area, mixer or anything, like you can catch me there. Huge on traveling. Definitely use most of my days off from my job to travel. My last big trip was in November 2019 to Taiwan, and that was my first time going international on my own, which was really fun. And obviously that hasn't happened. Nothing's happened after that because of the pandemic. But I'm really excited to get back to that.
Definitely. I think this year has been so challenging for everybody. I mean, do you think that, this year, this whole pandemic issue, like, has that any effect on your mental health, for example, or you've been too busy to even like notice?
Definitely a very negative impact on the mental health front. Anything, so I'm very extroverted, so anything I enjoy doing, can't do anymore.
Yeah.
Anything I look forward to, kind of can't do anymore. That being said, I did funnel a lot of that energy back into my career and on this platform, and this platform has given me the opportunity to connect with hundreds of people, thousands of people that I would never have met before. So that way I kind of get my extroversion fix. And I know we're incredibly blessed to be able to work these jobs that can happen remotely. Mm-hmm. So thank this year, career-wise, has been a good one. It came with a promotion earlier in the year, experiences, job opportunities, leadership opportunities, and then the one that I've quit my job for is another step up, which I'm really excited for. But I know that I'm one of very few people to be able to say that, so I'm very thankful and definitely taking it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's a good way to see things. Now, do you recommend any type of books or material for somebody who wants to start exploring coding or just in general computer engineering?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, I don't have a lot of book recommendations. I know Clean Code is one that a lot of people enjoy. But I would go straight to the tutorials. Coding is definitely something that you learn by doing more than observing necessarily. Like if you're reading a book, you're kind of observing it, you're reading it, but you're not doing it. But if you're doing a tutorial, like a hands-on code along tutorial, you're a lot more likely to pick up information. And then the important thing to remember when it comes to tutorials is that it's easy to get caught in tutorial hell, where you're doing tutorial and tutorial and tutorial, but you're never actually thinking of the idea and implementing it on your own. So I think after each tutorial, take a minute to come up with a related idea and code it on your own. Get used to going to Google to find your answers, because that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. No one knows anything really. We all Google everything, Google our way, writing code, and get familiar with that process. And it's very clunky at first, but in a few months, you will definitely begin to pick it up.
Awesome. Now, tell us a little bit about your daily routines. Like, what does a day in the life of a computer engineer, look like?
Sure. So, do you want a COVID version or a non-COVID version?
You can give us both. I mean, right now, what are you doing right now?
Well, cut this part out. Right now, all I do is sleep and eat. Because of not having the whole job. But a day in the life of just a software engineer, if you're working remotely in general, it's a very flexible job. So you can really start your hours whenever you want. If you are a morning person, you can definitely start at like 6 a.m., get a majority of your tasks out of the way earlier on and log off by 3 p.m. And if you're not a morning person, usually morning stand-ups at most companies start 9:30, 10, 10:30, 11 even. So you'll have a 15-minute meeting where you kind of talk about each member's team status, what they're working on for the day, what they worked on the previous day, any walkers they may have. From there, you're kind of in meetings depending on the day. It could be like a planning meeting, it could be a design meeting, it could be just a technical help someone else kind of meeting. It really depends on the day. And the rest of the time, you're kind of spending hands-on either coding or debugging something or providing support to a problem that may happen in production. You might be mentoring someone. You might be having lunch with a coworker, but it's generally a mix of those things. And for me, it was usually a 9:30 to 5:30 kind of a day. So in the mornings, I'd have time to post something on Instagram some days or sleep in till 9, whatever it may be. And then after work would be time for myself, whether it be exercise that day or there's honestly a lot of hours in the day. And it's a good thing that engineering is so flexible in that really you can kind of fit in any sort of hobby or interest kind of into your schedule.
That's super cool because not a lot of jobs do that, offer you that freedom. You're basically, all day in an office or in a hospital. But I like those kind of jobs that, you're allowed to kind of explore other things outside your field, outside your work. And entrepreneurship is one of them. And, I've been, very interested in exploring this, kind of being my own boss. But I appreciate, jobs that allow you to kind of, have the opportunity to explore other hobbies. I have 2 more questions for you. What projects are you currently working on and what do you expect to be doing in the next, 5 years, 10 years? Where do you see yourself?
So the projects I'm currently working on is really establishing my online presence. And the reason why is because in 5, 10, maybe even 20 years, I'd like to see myself in a leadership position, such as a director, vice president, so on. And obviously, at the point of experience I'm at now, which is like 3 to 4 years, no one's going to make me a director. But it's great at that point in time to have skill sets that are kind of a combination of technical, product, leadership, and that's where a lot of soft skills also come into play. Mm-hmm. And I think that the online presence that I'm building really helps with those soft skills and the leadership skills and the communication skills that I don't get at my day-to-day job. So I definitely think that spending my time honing those skills, the content creation, the creating powerful visuals, those are all skills that, while I don't use in my software engineering job day to day, I think are going to make me a very strong candidate for a director or beyond kind of leadership role down the line.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's a good ambition to have, especially, leadership, definitely. And I wish you the best. I can't wait to see what you do. I'll definitely be following your account. Now, last question. What would you tell a girl who wants to pursue your career? What kinds of skills or what kind of steps can she start cultivating now?
I think so. There's two ways to go at this. I was pushed at a very young, early age towards STEM, and I'm very thankful for that upbringing because it's probably what brought me here today. So things that, at the age of, I think, 5, 6 even, they have little coding, like children's online workshops. They have programs that teach kids JavaScript as early as before they can even read. So like 3 and 4-year-olds.
Oh, wow.
So you can start that early if you wanted to. That's a parent's decision at that point. But if we're talking about maybe with the middle school, high school age girl, there's a lot of things like maybe computer science or just generally programs that are oriented towards STEM education for females. Back in middle school, there was a program that I was part of, which was IBM's initiative to bring more women into the STEM fields. So that was a camp that I had done at the time. And I don't know if it still exists. It was 12, 13 years ago now. Yeah. But a lot of companies have outreach programs, basically, and they target middle school and high school age females. So my advice would be really to try to use Google. It's your best friend to find opportunities just like that. And that would be a good start to see whether or not it's even in your interests or skill sets. And I think the other thing to really remind this person of is that even if STEM isn't your interest now, don't rule it out forever. But if it's not your interest now, don't pursue it right now. Focus on spending your time doing things that kind of make you happy. At the end of the day, you're still a kid. So go be a kid. If you don't want to solve math problems all day, that's fine. I didn't want to when I was 15 either, and I continue to do it. But honestly, your time might be better spent playing outside in the dirt and riding bikes. Really. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no stress, no pressure. If you can do it, cool. If you can't, that's okay.
I love that. Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. I enjoyed talking to you. And like I said, I can't wait to, follow your content and see what you do next. So thank you so much.
And you too. I'm really excited to see this podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You liked what you heard? Tell me what you liked in the review section, and if you want more episodes like this, please share your suggestions. After this episode, the conversation continues in our new Facebook group. The question for today is, do you think internships in the tech world should be paid? Let me know by joining us at the Invernadero Mind Facebook group and share your thoughts. I can't wait to see you there.